Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Triangulation, episode 432, recorded February 10th, 2023. Daniel Suarez, Critical Mass. Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit. And thanks for your support. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get together with some of the most interesting people in the world and talk about stuff. And, you know, we only do Triangulation now when it's somebody really, really great. We say, well, we got to bring the show back. And this is somebody really, really great on his 5th visit to our studios. Daniel Suarez has a new book, and the world rejoices. Hey, Daniel.
Oh, it's so great to see you, Leo.
Always great to see you.
Yeah, it's been ages.
You said this is your 7th novel.
7th novel.
Wow.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of work.
Do you have it down now? You got it down pretty good?
It's a pleasant torture every time. Because I do so much research. I don't know why I do this to myself, but for a book like Critical Mass, I thought, okay, let's see, all I have to do for this story is marshal a better grasp of orbital mechanics, some rocket science, some chemistry,
no problem.
Medicine,
you got your slide
politics,
rule?
Economics, blockchain. I don't know why I do that
blockchain's
to myself.
even here.
Yes.
So Daniel first came to us with his book that was just kind of a breakout shock because Daniel who, and he wrote a book called Demon that just blew everybody's minds. Yeah. I mean, incredible. Followed up with Freedom TM, again, incredible. And you keep doing it again and again. This is the second book of a planned trilogy, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So if you haven't read Delta V yet, stop, pause the tape, and read it, because there might be some spoilers.
Yeah, mild spoilers.
Mild spoil. I think Delta V, even if you kind of knew what was going to happen, would still be like, wow.
The journey is worthwhile.
Yeah, the journey is well worth it. And now it's much of the same cast. We won't say who's missing.
Yep.
Some people are missing. Much of the same cast for the new one, Critical Mass. Mm-hmm. And then the third one, you're already writing it, right?
I am already in the conception and structuring phase for that. No title yet for that.
Oh,
so
okay.
Still conceiving.
Same kind of idea, though. We're talking about the same.
Yep, same
notions.
world, same, and a continuation.
Okay. What do you do? Do you put stuff on the wall and put strings in between the things? How do you?
So the analog versus the digital. I do tend to go analog in terms of index cards and things like that for structuring.
Yeah.
And it's not because I dislike digital tools. It's that I find when I'm using, like a computer to organize things, I spend too much time trying to deal with the equipment and settings.
That's right.
And if I just grab paper, and then I do the bold picture and rearrange things, then eventually it makes it into a computer once I've got the main structure down.
The other problem with computers, I don't think they've solved this yet, is it's hidden. It's like you take all those notes and those cards are now kind of disappeared onto a hard drive.
That's exactly right. You need it all up on a big board.
You want to see it all, right?
And that's what I do. I take big boards.
So you do.
And then I walk and I tend to color code various threads in the story.
Yeah.
Because the story will have an A, B, C thread, these sub-stories and themes, and then I color code them so that I can see pacing-wise how they connect.
Unfortunately, we'll get back to Critical Mass in a moment, but now I'm really intrigued by the process of this.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. We've talked before that you got your storytelling start as a dungeon master.
That's right. Oh, there is no better forge for creating writers, because you get that really instant and very honest feedback from your players when you're sucking at it. They tend to express their opinions.
You can't kill that dwarf.
Yeah,
with
that's right.
Number 23. I never played.
And then there's always the rules lawyers. The people who are going. And then there's also the people who take the legendary object and start to do things with it, like holding open a door and weird
can't
things.
Do that.
But it's good. So it trained me to think a story through all angles, and pacing and character. All of that stuff is important.
Interesting.
And this is particularly hard when you're dealing with complex topics. My stories tend to be about ideas,
Right.
And so you have to make those ideas, the new technologies and the big change, whether that's a genetic editing like Change Agent or lethally autonomous robotic weapons and Kill Decision. Those are going to be the big overriding themes and elements. And then within that, you have to make the characters function. You have to make them interesting enough, but you can't dedicate as many pages as you might to, like I said, a parlor drama or something like that.
It's a complicated...
It is.
Interlocking machine that you're building.
And I solve this by writing about twice as much book as I need. No
wonder it's painful.
Well, yeah, and all of that still requires a great deal of research. You don't know exactly which parts are going to make that final edit. I like to refer to it as scaffolding. That it's going to be stepped away when you're done with the book. It's about half.
You don't. Sometimes programmers will write a pseudocode that's not going to ever run.
Yeah,
but may in fact be incorrect.
Sure,
but it gives you some ideas.
Proof of concept.
Yeah. Do you do that before you've studied the science that you're writing about, or do you wait until you know what you know the subject?
All right, let's zoom out. The way I start a story, I accept, because I know this about myself, that I'm going to spend about a third of the time structuring and doing character.
Interesting.
And then I'm going to spend a third of the time of writing a book doing the research for that. And that's going to be a feedback loop to the structure. Because as I discover new things, the story and the structure might change.
So it's kind of like coding, isn't it?
It is. It's iterative.
Yeah.
So it's agile writing.
Do you have scrums with Michelle and the stand-ups?
No. It's interesting. I will occasionally discuss, does this sound crazy? But generally, it's an insular process. I think people know that I go dark on social media for a lot of the time. I'll just sort of
which is wise at any time, to be honest with you, but okay.
And again, I enjoy interacting with readers, especially online. It's just, it tends to fracture my concentration. So especially when I'm trying to really understand something that, because I have an English literature degree. I mean, I worked in computer software development and management for 17 years. So I'm very familiar with technology, but that largely came out of English literature in the sense that I found myself in the early 90s, how the internet started to take off. I'd always been interested in software and coding, and I just had an affinity for it. But I also was good at communicating between programmers and management because I could code fairly well, and I could help them understand why something was taking so long and so on. Because, otherwise I remember there was a senior programmer who was dealing with a CEO and was asked how long something was going to take. And he said, well, how long does it take to catch a fish? That's
a good answer, but not the one the manager wanted.
But not the one the CEO wants to hear. So
I'll have to remember that. That's very good. That's an unusual skill to both have the left brain and the right brain functioning at the same time.
I seem to have it, and
that's a good skill.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating because when I do a deep dive on technology, and I've done some really serious coding for pre-production planning systems, and I won't go into it.
You're in a friendly zone here.
It's a lot of logistics software for big companies, and that's really what became Damon grew out of that. Was I realized at one point that some of the software that I'd written had a great deal of power in the world, that ships and trains and trucks would not move unless my software told it to. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't think anybody fully realizes, especially as you're going into Y2K remediation in year 2000, there was a lot of coding done at the last minute to fix things. And there was a time when a multi-billion-dollar company, which will remain unnamed, had me doing the positive pay file and the check writing system, all of this stuff. And it was just me because a lot of other consultants had you
weren't doing it in COBOL, I hope. Were you?
No, we were pulling it out of things like that, Fortran and
Holy
COBOL.
cow.
So old legacy systems. That was an interesting time.
And it's funny because nothing bad happened.
No.
In the year 2000, but none of us knew how much had gone on prior to that to keep nothing bad happening.
And I think a Unix one is coming up in 2038.
2038. Well, that's what I thought was interesting about the year of critical mass. I was wondering. Because you don't mention it, but it's kind of an inside joke,
because it's going to be dealt with. It's going to be fine. I had a relative who was, hoarding cigarettes, thinking that was going to be the currency after the year 2000. So I was like, no, everything's going to be fine.
We were all on call on December 31st, 1999, in case the world ended and we have to rush in and do this just in. Another bridge has collapsed, and nothing. ATMs continued working. Everything. survived thanks to people like now
That's
you really
right.
can appreciate
the diligent
Daniel.
toiling of people like me.
He learned his diligent toiling in service of all of us.
That's right.
It's interesting. So when you were a literature major, do you think you would be writing other kinds of things, not genre? Forgive me for calling this genre fiction.
No,
but that's the term.
No,
right, for sci-fi.
no insult taken. It is. I want it to be accessible. I want mainstream readers to understand it. I suppose those people who want to be novelists always entertain the idea that they're going to write
Great American novel,
exactly. It'll be a farewell to arms or something like that. But what happened is, as I went out into the world and started to engage with technology, it just fascinated me.
Yeah.
And I did not set out to become a sci-fi writer. Many of my books take place in the present day or the very near future, or have become present day.
Yeah, that's one thing unusual about this. Yeah. This is kind of more distant than usual.
That's another challenge that I somehow set for myself, which is I think I'm going to write a book about the near future so that I'll be around when it happens, and then I'll have to answer. Many people.
Is bold.
It's irrationally stupid, maybe, but I have been fortunate that I haven't been too far off. For example, we've seen in Ukraine a lot of drone warfare.
Yeah.
Basically, whatever's going on in the news, whatever's going on in the news will tend to fill up my inbox occasionally. Like, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen that? CRISPR was like that with genetic editing.
Yep.
And then a lot of things happening with cyber war with Damon and Chat GPT and on and on. So it's interesting. So far, I've been fortunate. But one of the good things about that is not a lot of people are writing that near term because it is a risky thing to do. It requires a great deal of research and then a little prognostication. So
I was going to actually, it was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is the risk of getting the rug pulled in the middle of the novel.
Yes.
You talk about, and we've talked about this with Delta V, but one of the protagonist in Delta V is a billionaire who has an island.
That's right.
Who invests in space.
Oh, I like to say it's this way. He's a charismatic billionaire who has a difficult relationship with facts and the truth, and so it's total fiction.
Totally fiction.
Right.
And then there's blockchain in this new one, and when you started writing it, I'm sure the general attitude towards blockchain was much more positive.
Oh, than it is now. You're absolutely right. Yeah, there were a couple of companies, in fact, who got into the news due to some malfeasance.
Yes.
You
might have heard about that.
You might have heard about it, FTX and others. But see, I look at it this way, that when I wrote Damon, that had cryptocurrency in it, somewhat before Bitcoin appeared. And I've always been fascinated by that digital currency and proof of work and now proof of stake. But whatever news cycle is going on, whatever is happening with cryptocurrency and blockchain in particular, smart contracts, and especially NFTs. There are NFTs in this. And of course, there's almost an allergic reaction.
Yeah.
But what I like to say is, if you take a look at blockchain as a triple entry ledger, I'm convinced.
That's a good way to put it.
And I would lean upon my track record for prognostication. And it's not the primary purpose of what I'm writing about, but I try to get things right. I try to peek into the future a little bit, and I try to get it right. And there is something important there with blockchain.
Right.
The idea of not just a double entry ledger, but a triple entry where it's transparent and everyone can see it. And then you add the frontier of space to it. Because obviously we do not want to be moving around physical elements because that requires propellant in Delta V. So it's going to be digital. You do want it to be cryptographically secure because it's going to be the very definition of an untrusted environment. For example, who is in charge in space? So if you need to build an economy out there, you need trustless exchange. And so blockchain and crypto and NFTs are just, it's almost like they're made just in time for that. Like somebody was conceiving of this on Earth. The other thing to consider is that energy is not a problem out in space, especially near Earth. There is 1,348 watts per square meter of solar power. And then there could be nuclear power. You don't have to worry about contaminating the environment because it's an irradiated vacuum. So I think it's a perfect environment to experiment with blockchain. And there's the added element, you can base this digital currency on new resources and energy. So it's something that's intrinsically valuable, thus the NFT. So a little different than just trusting that, some exchange is not screwing around. If you're out in space and you can actually verify, you have a third party verify that there's energy or resources tied to that new currency, It has inherent value.
You say it a couple of times in this book. Space is a no BS zone.
Yes. Yeah, deep space will test us, and it will cure us of humanity's worst propensities for bullshit. Oh, am I allowed to
You can say it.
our worst propensities for bullshit? I'm glad I checked first.
Who said that?
That was Nathan Joyce. That was the billionaire Nathan Joyce insisting.
So really, Daniel Suarez said that.
No. I am always careful to say that I am not my characters. It's funny because I'll have people write me and be angry at something that a character said, and then angry at somebody else will be angry that another character said, and they're having an argument. It's like, I can't be both people.
I'm not there. It's just them.
And the other
they do take a life of their own, don't they?
They do. And the other thing is, I'd say that Nathan Joyce is a complicated character in that he is, I feel, right about something.
This is the billionaire.
He's the billionaire who sets this all in motion. And by the way, I could lay this out.
Even though he said space is a no BS zone, he was a font of BS.
So he was an expert in BS.
he knew all about it.
But he was Earth-based. So that's true. That's okay.
That's
out
true.
in space, you cannot. It's only truth and facts that are going to keep you alive.
It's a hostile environment.
It's a very hostile environment.
You can't trick your way through it.
You can't bluff. Can't bluff space. And so you have to rely on each other regardless of what your personal belief system is. If you take that helmet off, you're dead.
Yeah.
No matter what you believe. And if you run out of oxygen. I should probably quickly do a synopsis of critical mass. Do you want me to do that, or is that too...
Will it spoil it for people?
No. This is a
spoiler-free?
A spoiler-free.
Time-tested. All right.
Well, it's not spoiler-free for Delta V. So if you haven't read Delta V, close your ears momentarily.
This is, we're talking to Daniel Suarez.
We're talking about critical mass.
His new book, Critical Mass, just came out January 31st. I was on the pre-order list, even though you had very kindly sent me a few copies, which immediately disappeared as John and everybody said, oh, the new Daniel Suarez is out. And this is the second following in the trilogy, following Delta V.
That's right.
The third one to come.
Although you can read it standalone. So.
Yeah, actually, because you kind of recap where we are, why we're here so far.
I don't recommend it, but you can.
The thing that was so cool about Delta V, it was about asteroid mining.
That's right.
Not about going to Mars, per se.
No, it wasn't.
Or I guess eventually the moon would kind of be part of it. But the idea of mining resources outside of the Delta V to get out of the Earth's atmosphere is so high and so costly that if you could do stuff in space, it saves you a lot of money. It makes a lot more possible. So we continue on after some calamitous occurrences.
Yes. Oh, that's well said. That's good. No spoilers there.
Calamity.
Yeah.
It's space.
Well, the key thing about that is we don't want to have to lift millions of tons out of Earth's deep gravity well into space, because that would require thousands of launches, even with Starship. You're talking about dumping thousands and thousands of tons of CO2 and methane high in the atmosphere. In situ resource utilization, that is utilizing resources in space, would be the way to obtain millions and billions of tons of working mass, which is really what is referred to in the title critical mass.
And it turns out there's a lot out there.
There is. As a matter of fact, in the first book, the asteroid is Ryugu,
which is a real asteroid.
Real asteroid, and the trajectory in the book Delta V is also a real trajectory. It's December 13th, 2032, I think.
I heard you on This Week in Space. Great interview. If people want more Daniel Suarez,
it was so fun.
That previous episode of This Week in Space with Rod Pyle and Tarek Malik, talking about why you chose Ryugu, and because of the launch window being just right for the timing of the novel.
That's right. And also, there is a part of me that wants to inspire people who may...
We could do this.
Well, that's the key thing. There really is no reason why Delta V and critical mass have to remain fiction. That's the thing that I'm trying to get across to people is many of these technologies were conceived of, and some of them built in prototype form back in the 1970s and 1980s. Which is remarkable, but of course that was part of the Cold War space race. Now, this book takes place in the late 2030s.
2038, to be exact.
2038, so Unix people.
We've solved the problem.
Take a breath.
Thank goodness.
That problem is solved. But the asteroid miners from the first book, Delta V, have returned to Earth, and they have to use the resources they placed in lunar orbit, and they've returned there to rescue two colleagues they left behind at Ryugu. And by the time they've come back, there's a new space race on between China and the United States. And they also have designs on those asteroid resources as well as part of that competition. And so do several billionaires. So that is the source of the conflict.
There's
in
a
this
kind
book.
of a gold mine in the Lagrange point, just float, or is it in orbit? Floating
Any
around.
two-body orbital system will have 5 Lagrange points, and these are areas of. They differ a little between each other, but they're essentially equal gravitational attraction zones. So if you place something at any of these 5 points, it will largely stay there.
That's where James Webb is.
Yes, exactly. It is at the L1 point, I believe, between the sun and the Earth. But again, any two-body system.
He's at L2?
Oh, is it L2? Okay, sorry. My gosh.
Don't say-
By the way, I love James
We got
Webb.
somebody who's a fan, huge fan. Jammer B, John Slanina is running the board.
It needs
and
the shade. Of course it does.
He's
See, as I'm on the road.
he's one of the people who stole the book as soon as it came in.
But
He loves your stuff, as we all do.
And by the way, the L1 and the L2 points of the Earth-Moon are very important in this book.
Yes.
So that's much closer. And it's about cislunar space. And when I say that, that really just means the celestial neighborhood of the Earth and the Moon. It's, I think, 60,000 kilometers past the Moon and all the way past the other side of Earth. So being able to avail ourselves of near-Earth asteroids to bootstrap ourselves. And the benefit of going to an asteroid like Ryugu is you don't have to go back into a gravity well like the Moon. You can go, and at certain key points, like December 13th, 2032, you can rendezvous with a near-Earth asteroid like Ryugu. It's 450 million metric tons of material, nickel, iron, titanium, ammonia, all sorts of
Billions of dollars worth of
Yes.
stuff.
I think it's $90 billion was the
Amazing.
recent estimate. But you can bring that back much more easily because you don't have to bring it out of a deep gravity well. And of course, in the book Delta V, they show how they process it and bring it back. And that plants the seed for the second book.
Yeah.
Because, of course, that becomes a very sought-after thing.
You got a gold mine floating
Yes.
around.
Actually, yes. It's probably even more worthwhile than a gold mine.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to bootstrap it into billions and then trillions of dollars. But it's what those resources allow you to do in space. And really what I focus on in this book is how going to space will help us save Earth and civilization and everyone on it. Because we are dealing with, of course, climate change, with species extinction, resource depletion, growing conflict. There is, because of the constellations of low Earth satellites going into orbit, if there is a conflict between first world powers, one of the first things that will happen is they will try to knock out each other's satellites. With so many satellites in orbit, that debris expanding can cause a cascade and create a shroud of debris in low Earth orbit. It's called a Kessler syndrome that could prevent us from going to orbit safely at all for generations. So there's a real...
Not to mention shut out the sun and
if it's that bad, we have serious problems. But even if it's just paint flecks, a paint fleck going at tens of thousands of miles an hour will really ruin your
We're
day.
seeing that with the web getting bombarded with rocks. Yeah, it's dangerous out there. Is that the synopsis? Is that sufficient?
That is sufficient.
Okay.
I think.
One of the things you do in this, which is great, is you actually let Nathan Joyce tell the larger story.
The master plan.
The master plan of our future.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting because it sounds to me, that one is in, I almost hear Daniel Suarez saying, folks, this is what we need to do.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. And it is also, all I would say is that there is an element of risk here that is quite large, that people will be going into danger and that we have to recalibrate what we perceive as risk when it comes to space. And I say that because of the risk of doing nothing, I think is greater, or moving too slowly, for all the reasons that I mentioned just recently. We have billions and billions of people who require for their futures. I mean, there's 3 billion people some odd who are living at bare subsistence level, and they want to improve their condition for themselves and their children. And if everyone on Earth starts living at a first world level, we are really going to poison the Earth. But it's also unfair that only some people. So the idea of availing ourselves of new energy and resources in space, bringing that to bear to Earth through, you pointed at one of the solar power satellites, sending microwave energy, clean microwave energy down to Earth. Now, people see that and they immediately see a death ray. And I would point out that we're talking 100 watts per square meter, maybe 200. What you could stand in that beam.
It's using microwave.
It's using microwaves. And this, again, is a technology that has been around, was conceived of way back in the 70s. We use this technology for cellular communications, and, birds fly through the beam all the time.
Right.
I understand why people are concerned and they see those big solar power satellites and they think it's a death ray. But to that, I would say everything is visible in space. And if you put this large 4 or 5 kilometer wide solar power satellite in space, everybody's going to see it. And if you start to change it and turn it into a weapon, it's going to be very apparent. And people will have lots to say about it. And it is also uniquely vulnerable.
So this solves a big problem, which is energy.
Energy, clean energy that does not further heat up the Earth. Because, again, you're intercepting solar power that really is heading towards the Earth anyway.
Just focusing it.
You're focusing it at a certain frequency and sending it down to a receiver called a rectenna, which can absorb it. Now, this is where I think a lot of people say, yeah, but the converting that energy into a microwaves up in space and then sending it down, then reconverting it back into the grid, by the time you're done, it's 9% efficient. But
so what?
Yeah, well, that's one thing, especially if there's chaos on the planet, right? If, let's say, there's a mass migration or wildfires or economic collapse, this is in space, so it will be invulnerable to that. But the other good thing is you're sending that clean energy wherever it's needed. And
you can move these rectennas easily.
You don't even necessarily have to move them.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the hemisphere beneath it, let's say in geosynchronous orbit, you can beam that energy. You can adjust
you can aim the satellite.
You can adjust it without any moving parts. You can direct it to various, or you can bifurcate it. You can split it and send it to different cities. And the rectennas are very cheap to build. And like I said, you could even stand in the beam and you will not get fried. And one more little thing is that you can actually grow crops underneath it. You could put this above pasture land.
Most of the sun gets through.
Most of the sun gets through. So,
what a cool technology. We've heard, as you said, we've heard about this since the 70s.
And there are tests coming up, by the way. They are doing a test soon.
A lot of the cost of doing this is getting it out of the gravity well of the Earth.
Correct.
So now you see why it's important that we have this material in space that you could then construct these.
That's right. That one right there is about 7,400 tons. That was John Menken's design. That's an SPS Alpha, I think, 2. I think it's his second design. But again, it's very modular, can be made with robotics. So they could mass produce them as long as they have the mass in deep space. You put those into geosynchronous orbit. We could put thousands of them in geosynchronous orbit and beam terawatts of energy back to Earth. And that could help us remove CO2 because that's the big question. We see this with Climeworks and companies like that, pulling CO2 out of the air. Where are you going to get sufficient clean energy to do that? And so geothermal is thought of sometimes.
You don't do this kind of as Starlink is being done, where you're launching these from the Earth and putting them up in orbit. Ideally, you would start with harvesting materials in space, either on an asteroid or
at this scale, you kind of have to. Because again, 7,400 tons, that gives you about 2 gigawatts that you can beam back.
Right.
And if you want hundreds and hundreds of these, that we're talking hundreds of thousands and millions of tons, you're going to want to do in situ resource utilization, either from a near-Earth asteroid or from the surface of the moon. And that's where a mass driver comes in.
It's a really exciting future that you're envisioning. I just hope you're right, because if we don't do this, it's going to be difficult. I mean,
but notice the feeling you have, right? It is a hopeful thing, and it's also not BS. It isn't, in the sense that
it exists.
And Gerard K. O'Neill wrote about this in The High Frontier. Peter Glaser, these are scientists who, and NASA has checked out the economics of it. It's just a matter of getting the working mass, which is why that's called critical mass, because it is critical. It's also a critical mass of opinion to support this here on Earth.
Right. Political will to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. And do it soon before it's too late, really. I mean, we don't have a lot of time.
We don't.
It's not the launch window is the problem. It's getting the political will to do this.
Exactly. Yeah, we have about 10 years to get started. And the good thing about it, though, is I think it would bring us together around the world. There's a tremendous opportunity for economic growth as well.
We're talking with Daniel Suarez about his new book, Critical Mass, which standalone is just fine. It's on Audible. It's in Amazon. It's in your bookstore. Dutton is the publisher. Jeff Gerner, who has read all of your books, reads this one.
Has.
Again, it's nice to have Jeff. In fact, if you want a real thrill, I think maybe it was the second time we interviewed Daniel.
I think so.
On Triangulation. He brought Jeff with him.
That's right.
And to hear Jeff suddenly go into that voice and hear the story, it gave me chills. It It was really
It was a little
exciting.
freaky for me, too.
It's weird to hear. Wait a minute, that's the voice I hear. So, when you started writing science fiction, was it with the idea of changing the world?
Yeah, was it that much of a megalomaniac that I am? I suppose that's probably the reason, in some way, people write novels. Is if not change the world, they want to communicate something they're feeling, and that's definitely was the case with Damon, my first novel. It was because I was laboring behind the scenes, designing elements of, let's say, the infrastructure, private infrastructure of the world, corporations, how they move things about, that had an outsized impact on how people lived. And I wanted more people to be aware of how it worked and what its vulnerabilities were.
To know what's going on under the hood.
And what might be done to rectify that.
Yeah.
And so I actually entertained the idea of doing like a white paper for a time. Then I realized, I've always wanted to write a novel.
Yeah.
Why don't I write a novel? And then it just took on a life of its own. So it took me about 2 years. And then I couldn't find a literary agent. And then I eventually self-published it. And it turns out I was right. People were interested in it.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it took off.
That's kind of exciting. That's the new world, isn't it, of publishing? You don't have to pound the pavement and knock on doors until you find somebody to put this in book form. You could do it yourself.
You find your own audience.
Yeah.
And when you've found your audience, then literary agents and others come to you. And then if you want to go that mainstream, you can. You don't necessarily have to. You can roll your own career and do it however you want.
So you always had a mission. You were always the town crier.
I guess I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I very concerned about the future in the way that I'm just convinced the future could be amazing.
Yeah.
Because that was another really one of the catalysts for writing this is that, and this is going back 8 years that I've wanted to write these books. I kept thinking as I watched shows placed 400, 500, or 1,000 years in the future, there's all these spaceships and all for the celestial civilization. It's like, how do we get there? Like, no joke. How do we, from standing where I am here in the present, step by step, no hand waving, how do we get there? And that's what I'm trying to answer. And so it was trying to answer that question for me. I didn't know what the answer was. Perhaps initially I was thinking Mars colonization would be cool. And of course, as you indicated, I've changed on that. It does not make any sense.
It's funny. Andy Weir was on talking about one of his books, and he said, you don't want to go to Mars.
Yeah.
It is hostile.
Yeah. Antarctica is very cozy compared to Mars.
You do not want to try to live on Mars.
Yeah. And we have pressing work to do here.
Well, and even if we did want to live on Mars, there's intermediate steps.
And
we have
that's
to take
exactly
those.
what this is.
We have to start with those.
Yeah.
It's really brave of you. I think a lot of speculative fiction is a lot of hand waving, a lot of Deus ex machina. Well, we have faster than light now.
Yep.
And by the way,
Exactly.
we'll need faster than light communication, of course.
Yep.
And let's see, there's 13 alien species.
That's right. We haven't killed each other.
I mean, it's fun, and I enjoy reading it.
It's a different thing.
It's a different thing, and I like the idea of, without getting preachy, talking about what could happen with what where we are today, where we could be tomorrow.
That's
right. But it's also brave of you, as you point out. I mean, you're taking big chances. So far, you've been right on.
Well, okay, I'll do that too. I will say that I do take my lumps, and that's part of it. The other thing is that I have various characters. I try to accurately portray the points of view of the various parties.
Yeah, that's the big challenge right now. It's really a political challenge.
Yeah.
It's not a scientific challenge, as you point out. We've invented the technologies. We know what we need to do.
Yeah, what are our political priorities? What are our economic priorities?
Yeah.
Because really, if you think about it, if we're going into space, and when I say we, humanity, and we're in the process of doing that now, what value system are we bringing there? What legal system? What political system? What economic system? And this is happening in real time. And whatever we set up there is going to be inertia to change it after the fact. So I really wanted to explore this before we're doing this in earnest.
Humans don't have a great history of forward-thinking planning.
It is, but we're still here somehow.
Somehow we've survived, just kind of doing what happens, doing what feels good, and see what happens. Throw the chips in the air.
Things have gotten better and better slowly. It doesn't seem it like quite a bit of the time, and let's call it punctuated equilibrium. But sometimes there's a shock.
You're a believer in Steven Pinker's notion that
That might be pushing it. I think that might be a little Pollyannish for me. I don't think things are getting constantly better. They're getting worse for some people.
Yes, that's a
and
good
other
point.
people. And you want to try to move that big fat part of the
bell curve.
the
Move
bell
it over
curve.
a little to the right.
Include as many people as possible.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that.
And that's why I'm not, for example, a proponent of degrowth. I think there is a very bad track record in history of trying to shrink things peaceably, because invariably people are going to defend whatever piece of the pie they already have. And I think Gerard K. O'Neill talked about this in his book High Frontier. This is 1976, a nonfiction book, when he was saying it is partly our responsibility to be able to lift all boats. The idea, if we can obtain more resources and energy to help everyone in the world get to a better place. And that was just such a positive message for me. It really stuck with me. I read that book when I was like a boy. I was like 10. And it stuck with me my entire life as a really decent and also difficult, adventurous thing to do that would bring us together. And that's why in this story, I have an international cast of characters trying to do this. Some of them are very self-interested and not interested in the world, but yet they're out there participating right up with anybody, everyone else, and they learn to rely on each other.
I don't want people to think this is a preachy book, because it's
No,
not.
it is not. Yeah, believe me, there's all types in this book.
Yeah, and there's some really fantastic set pieces. I love the dirigible flight to Lagos. That is I hope that comes true.
Oh, I would love to do that.
They take a balloon because jet flight is environmentally frighteningly costly. So is there
at
a
least
better
private
way?
jets? At least private jets,
Yeah.
and we're starting to see some of that. People recording tail numbers, you know, and shaming people in social media.
You actually, and it's amazing because you are prescient, because you mentioned that.
It's so
in
weird.
Here. And then, I'm sure long after you wrote this, we've got Elon Tail Tracker and all of that.
Yeah, it was about maybe 8 or 9 months after that, and I was like, oh wow,
I hit the nail on that one.
yeah.
Does that happen a lot for you? You go, hey, I got that.
It happens more than I think it would.
It's good.
I know usually when I'm invited to do scenario spinning by various organizations, like, okay, I must have gotten something right. But
you don't think of yourself as a futurist.
I try to avoid that because it's not primarily what I'm doing. I tend to think personally, and maybe futurists would be offended by this, I tend to think of that as sort of guessing at the future or making some prognostication about it, when really I'm going to be even more, egocentric. I'm trying in some ways to put some spin on the ball. I'm trying to affect the future. I want to inspire people in some way to maybe see something they hadn't thought of. And I feel that I succeed in that when I get emails from people saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm not typically interested in these things, but I get it now. And especially when I'm getting more and more emails, having done Delta V and now Critical Mass, from young people saying, I want to study astronautical engineering now. And it's because they can see a through path to a future they want to live in, and they want to try to help make that happen. That makes me so happy.
It's funny because I think in the early days of science fiction, it was kind of looked down upon. It was pulp fiction. It was an analog magazine, and it was, the crazy illustrations of Martians on the
That's right.
and all of that. But what we now know is that so many of our scientists and our great thinkers were inspired by that speculative fiction of the 50s and the 60s.
Yes.
And it turns out science fiction writers have an outsized impact on the direction society takes.
I think it goes both ways. It's a feedback loop. And Alexander McDonald is the chief economist for NASA. He has a TEDx talk on this, of the symbiotic relationship. It's a great talk. I recommend you check it out, where he talks about, I think it's starting back as early as the 1600s, some of the first science fiction that was written about
Jules Verne?
Even before then. And I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but he wrote a book about a guy strapping himself to geese and going to the moon. So we're talking a ways back. But who was inspired by that book was Jules Verne and people like that, who started to get ideas.
So it's been
and then it goes back and forward and back and forward. And when you see, I won't give away some of the things he reveals in terms of its connection to what the Apollo mission was and one of the earlier stories, and the similarities they had. It's really interesting. So I guess we help each other. We try to
But Elon Musk even says, I'm inspired by the science fiction I read as a kid.
Yeah.
And that's where these ideas, for many of his ideas, that's where these ideas come from. So you are in a way writing that white paper.
Hopefully more entertaining.
It's
than
much more
paper.
entertaining. And it's kind of interesting. I want to tell people who want to participate that we want you to participate. There's several ways to do that. If you're watching live, you can, in our IRC, you can ask questions of Daniel there. If you're in our club, we also want to make this a club event, so our Club TWiT Discord members can ask questions via text, but you can also, there's a link in the Club TWiT event channel that you can use to zoom in to us. There it is. Ant just posted it once again. Join our Cloud HD video meeting so that we can hear from you directly. And once you're in there, raise your hand and I'll, it's very orderly here. Raise your hand and I will call on you. So we mentioned satellites beaming energy from the Earth. We mentioned asteroid reclamation. Mm-hmm. Is that a well understood technology right now? Is that something we would know how to do? It feels like that's something Elon should be working on instead of going to Mars.
Well, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I won't speak for him on that, but
he's distracted right now, unfortunately.
They had that rocket test yesterday, was it?
Yeah, they're having trouble with there were mushrooms growing in the engine.
That happens.
Starship. These things happen. It's Florida. It's humid.
That's why you have to do it. You have to try it. It's Florida, exactly. All right. No, it must have been Texas.
It was probably Boca Chica or somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, there's it's hard. Space is hard. Yeah. And I think actually what happened with Starship is his attention wandered. And as a result, it kind of started to fall apart. So pay attention, okay? Yeah. So step one, what would you say step one should be from right now where we are to head to this future that you're describing in Critical Mass?
In bold strokes, I would say we need to go back to the moon. And we do need, I think, to build what's called a mass driver on the moon, which is a means to propel, without using propellant, to fire using an electromagnetic railgun.
I love this thing you described.
Well, this is again a real design, and it is essentially an unrolled electric motor. An electric motor has a series of magnets. In this case, you're using high power magnets, and you're propelling a mass down a barrel using that. It's like a rail gun. It's not quite the same technology, but that's probably similar to what most people would be familiar with from sci-fi. And because the moon has no atmosphere, you can accelerate it. I think it's to like 2.5 something kilometers per second. So this mass driver needs to be a kilometer or two long. It needs to be very hardy mass. In other words, it needs to be fairly solid. You accelerate it really fast, and you can hurl it literally off of the moon. And if you place that mass driver in the right spot, and if you hurtle it into orbit at just the right speed, you can send it up to L2, which is beyond the moon, where you could place a space station that has a refinery.
A giant catcher's mitt.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Almost all of the energy will have been expelled by the time it gets there.
Floats there.
So you just kind of, they actually, from the 70s, they designed a spinning cone craft, which would intercept it as it comes by and and then they would just absorb it. And then they would start to process it. So you could obtain millions of tons of working mass from there, which you could then turn into oxygen. A lot of people don't realize that the regolith of the moon is about 42% on average pure oxygen.
Isn't that amazing?
And then, of course, you have aluminum, titanium, you have iron, you have all of these various
You go to
resources.
a part of the moon where there's 2 meters deep of this soft, easily harvestable regolith.
About 4 times finer than talcum powder.
Yeah.
So you don't want to breathe it.
You don't want to live
there.
It
will go right into your bloodstream
kill you
if you breathe it.
But you scoop it up, you pitch it into space, to the L2 point.
That's right.
And from there, do you start building the satellites to gather?
Yes, because at L2, again, this is an equal pull. It's easy to get just about anywhere from L2 or L1. With a little propulsion, you could bring it down towards geosynchronous orbit, which is about 22,000 miles from Earth. And whatever you place in that orbit will remain over the same spot on Earth. And so geosynchronous orbit has many satellites already, but you could also put those satellites and sort of rack them onto these big satellites as you start to fill. Now, I remember reading, and I want to get this right, it's about 355 terawatts of energy we could create if we fully populated the geosynchronous orbit with these satellites. We don't need to do anything.
That's more than we use right now, right?
Yes.
It's like 2.2 terawatts.
I think we're using, and I probably should have refreshed my memory.
It's in the book, I know.
I know, I wrote it in the book, but trying to remember, I think it's like 10 terawatts of energy. But by the year of this, I think it might be up to 12. But anyway,
12,
Google it. You'll find it. It's easily found.
So it's
that
more
is
than enough.
many, many times more than what we're using now. And so we don't need to populate so heavily. So if we start to do that...
And that solves a lot of problems on Earth initially, including carbon sequestration, which is kind of interesting. You point out that we're already so far down the road of carbonizing our atmosphere that we need to actually, to survive, pull it out.
Yeah, we do need to pull it out. And that's the other thing is, I think it's not fully appreciated that if we stopped emitting carbon, CO2, greenhouse gases today,
it's going to continue.
It would continue to warm for decades and decades because of the thermal properties of CO2. So as the sunlight comes in, it retains more of it in the infrared spectrum, and so we'll continue heating.
There's also add-on effects like the melting of the permafrost, which
could release methane, which is even worse.
A lot more. Yeah. Yep. So it's a cascade. But we could, if we had the will, reverse it.
Or even, let's just put it this way, even just the naked greed to make money do this.
In this case.
In this case, I want to try to direct people, say, you want to make $1 trillion, do this. Yeah. Because being able to bring that amount of energy to bear, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, he mentioned that the first trillionaire might be an asteroid miner.
Sure.
But you're talking about truly mammoth scale in terms of resource extraction. And again, you don't want to scar the moon. You don't have to. You can do it in a way.
Oh, scar the moon. Who cares?
Oh, well.
Make a few more mares. What do we...
It's a romantic thing. The moon in
don't
the
scar
sky.
the moon. Do it on the backside. Yeah. You actually, it's funny. You say, well, the U.S. and the Chinese are fighting over the poles.
They're having an active debate, let's say.
An active debate. So let's go somewhere else.
Yes.
Let's just leave that to them.
But, it's interesting. You bring that up, that it's from the book. Nathan Joyce, he's thinking, I'm going to go to the equator of the moon, and that is because that is the precise spot where you need to place that mass driver.
Turns out that's the better spot.
And it's the exact spot. And this is coming again from NASA plans.
I love
These were papers that people had done and were never built, obviously.
So we know a lot of this stuff.
We know a lot of it.
Somebody's going to get, maybe many are going to get very rich.
I'd be so happy for them if they did.
Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is building his penis rocket to launch celebrities to low Earth, to low atmosphere. What? Yeah. Do you just bring this book to them and go, read the book?
Yeah, see, I don't think I could start beating them with the book.
Read the book.
They have secure bodyguards.
What's keeping them from... look, I know you do a ton of research, and you've mentioned before that the success of these books has given you access to people that you know are really high up and involved in this. Do you get the sense that they get it and we're moving in this direction, or are they just ignoring what is in? I mean, it's obvious at this point what's inevitable.
I don't think they're ignoring it. I think a lot is coming at them every second.
They're not focused on what needs to be done.
I get invited to certain events because of these books, and some of those people, some billionaires and others are fans of my books. And I'm happy about that. So I get invited to some unusual events. One of them, and I won't mention which one it is. It was sci-fi. So there are a lot of people go to it. That much I'll mention. But while I was there, I was walking with a billionaire, and after talking with him for 2 hours, I was exhausted, not by him, but by the sheer number of people who were coming at him every single minute with an urgent business plan or something to do or invest in. Yeah. And this was in a closed environment, and it gave me a better appreciation for what it must be like to be like that. You are literally like a black hole drawing all sorts of things in you constantly, no matter what you do. So a lot vying for their attention.
And also we've seen that that kind of money and success can kind of change a person.
Sure.
And change their focus.
Sure.
But government's not going to do this either. They're just as distracted.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I talk to a lot of people in NASA and elsewhere. So many of them are committed to this type of thing. They want to do this, but then there's also the bureaucratic nature of that organization because of the way it's funded.
Marketing has become the most important job of NASA.
And they're doing a great job at it. Yeah, you look some of it. But here's the thing, I know. What are they spending? It's not
really the job. That's the sad thing.
But it is the job to get their funding. And again, I'm not even going to defend it. You are correct. However, look at SLS. and people say, "Oh my God, it's taking forever." It took James Webb. Oh, it took forever. James Webb was amazing.
What a success!
What
story.
a success!
That actually gave me so much hope.
Oh,
because we
Christmas
could do
Day
that.
gift, boy, that was fantastic. Yeah. But this nation, the United States, does need a national rocket. We do need our own way to get to space. And the other thing is the way they do that, the development and building of those rockets. It's not the way NASA necessarily wants to do them. It's how Congress and Senate
saying, I want a plant to build this spaceship in my district.
Exactly.
And as a result, you're building the SLS
in 34 different locations
all over the country.
That's right.
It's not how you build it. That's not how. Right. That's not how it's set. Now, do you think the Chinese, given their focus and their totalitarian nature, maybe will succeed where we fail?
I think it airs in the other way, in that nobody. In an autocratic system where people are afraid of the leader, they might not say things are wrong or bring up some. So it's the opposite problem.
Yeah.
I think
we need to make Elon Musk the president of China, and then.
I'm not even touching that.
Don't even go there. We're talking to Daniel Suarez, the author of Critical Mass. It is a great read, but there is a lot of good stuff in here, and I hope politicians and billionaires and the people who need to hear this read it, because we need them to get it together. We have a question from our club. Is it? Who is it? And I don't see that. I can't read the name. It's so distant. James, come on down. There he is, with his license plates on the wall. James, unmute your mic and say hello.
Hi, guys.
Welcome to Daniel Suarez, James. Where are you calling from today?
I'm calling in from outside Philadelphia. Go Eagles!
Oh, I was going to ask Daniel who he's rooting for tomorrow or day after tomorrow.
Right. Who you got, Daniel? Who do you think?
Are you a football fan? He can't hear. You got to turn the bleed on.
Yeah.
Oh, he can't hear me.
Yeah, he wanted to. No, that's all right. We're going to make it work, James. But he was asking if you're a football fan.
I used to be, and then years ago, I just sort of fell out of the habit and replaced it with other things. And then when I get pulled into writing, I disappear literally for 2 years.
You don't have time to watch silly
I used to enjoy it. I don't want to say silly. I just, I don't know. I spend my time in different things these days.
It's an interesting point, though, is that we don't yet get that we're in a crisis, a global crisis. And by the time we wake up to that, it may be too late.
Yeah.
And instead, we're distracting ourselves to death. We're allowing ourselves to be sidetracked. So,
by the way, to that, I'd also add, there's also this tremendous opportunity. So, if we act in time, the future could be amazing.
Ever the optimist, this man.
Well, this comes out of the research I've done, and I didn't know whether I was going to be pessimistic or optimistic, having done all this research, but I just feel like it's right there. I just feel like we're shaking people and saying,
that's
this
what
future.
I mean. Hit them with the book.
Okay, I guess you're right.
James, have you read any of Daniel's books?
Yeah, all I asked was Eagles or Chiefs, and we ended up with that.
But, by the way,
that's
Chiefs,
what I like about Triangulation.
Chiefs are going to win. I know, and the Eagles beat the heck out of our 49ers. You
guys didn't show up, man.
You deserved that. Congratulations. But I think it's going to be a tough Sunday for you. But anyway, continue on.
Yes, I did. I actually just finished Delta V. I saw this pop up on the Club TWiT calendar.
Awesome.
I thought I got to catch up.
Thank you.
Oh, I loved it.
Isn't it great? It's a really good book.
Yeah.
And this, follows right on,
It does.
I'm so excited because there were some things in Delta V that weren't quite closed, and I'm like, is there going to be another one? So
there's
I was happy to see that
You're in luck.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy. My question is actually related to Delta V. One of the things that I love about sci-fi is when the topics and the technology are close to what we have in real life. For example, in Delta V, the honeybees I read at the end of the book are actually based on real technology being developed by a company. Is it difficult to find commercial companies that are willing to share that kind of detail? Because I got to imagine there's some proprietary stuff involved that maybe they don't want to release too soon for fear of losing money.
That's a great question. So shall I repeat the question
No, everybody else heard
everybody
it.
Heard it. Yeah. When I do research, it helps to some degree that I'm writing a novel. That tends to tamp down whatever concerns people have, because I'm not going to do an article in, let's say, Wired magazine in a week and a half. They know it might be a year or two, and the way they're doing their development, they might have something coming out or getting patented in 6 months. So that helps a little. But the other thing is I've encountered a lot of innovators who, first of all, see what my enthusiasm is, that I want them to succeed. I'm not going to misrepresent what they're doing, but I want this to happen, and they want this to happen. So in some ways, we're kindred spirits. And I think that comes across when you're dealing with people one-on-one. So the pandemic made that a little difficult at times because I couldn't quite go see or get a tour of their facility. But as it loosened up a bit, I did. Fortunately for Delta V, that happened before the pandemic. And so, when you talk about the companies involved in that, I was able to go see them and meet with them. And it didn't turn out to be a problem. They were happy to share.
I think to some degree we're going to name Daniel Suarez our ambassador to the future.
Oh, I like that.
Because people like him. They love his novels at every level, and they know him. And he's bringing a message of hope.
Yeah.
And a very practical message of hope, not some pie in the sky, we're going to build domes on the moon.
Yeah.
Message.
And no BS, remember?
No BS.
Yeah.
And maybe they might get inspired to say, yeah, we need to do this.
That's right. And remember that reciprocal process between the engineers who build and the sci-fi writers, and we inspire each other.
Yeah.
And it keep going higher and higher and higher.
It's the first time I've had any hope at all for the human future in about 4 years. So
well, good.
I'm glad.
Wonderful.
He's our ambassador of hope. James, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks.
It's great
I can't wait to read Critical Mass.
Thanks for being in the club. We appreciate it. He's a Unix. Guys. Are you a Unix sysadmin? I see a Unix book behind you there.
Only when I'm forced to.
So is 2038 giving you is it triggering you as you read the book?
Oh, I hope to be retired on my private island by then. Not my problem.
It's so funny when I saw it was 2038. I knew Daniel did that on purpose, right? You don't.
Oh, it's the trajectories. What can I tell you?
Oh, you can't choose it because it's the date that we have.
This.
Well, it's 4 years before we have to launch.
Yes, it's a ruthless celestial clock.
Right.
And
right. So that's what's kind of cool about this book is the clock is ticking.
Yes, it is.
And this team has 4 years to get it together.
Until the asteroid comes around again.
Right.
They have to be ready, and they have to really drastically accelerate human achievement in space before then to have any chance of getting their colleagues. So,
James, just for you, I'm going to root for the Eagles on Sunday, okay?
Oh, thanks, Leo. That'll make the difference.
Fly, Eagles, fly. Well, O'Doct is a big Eagles fan, too. We had a little bit of jawbone and going back and forth when it was the Eagles and Niners. So.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks, James.
Guys.
Appreciate the question. Do we have any more questions from... I have a question from Used Up in our IRC. He says, is this a series of books?
It is. It's a trilogy right now. Now, will it grow from there? Maybe. I'm not sure. I do know that it's a trilogy now, a planned trilogy now. I'm working on a third book. I want it to, again, be that bridge, if you will, crossing that chasm between our present and that celestial civilization in the future.
So as Daniel says, this does stand alone. You don't have to read Delta V, but Delta V is the first in the series. And actually, it's a great read. I don't see why you wouldn't get Delta V. Read that, just as James did. And then now that Critical Mass is out, read this. It's one of the things John and I constantly bemoan is we get involved in these trilogies and the book stops and you have to wait a year or two.
Yeah.
For the next one.
Yeah, Game of Thrones comes to mind.
Game of Thrones comes to mind. So you're actually in good shape now because you got 2 to read.
Yes, this book took me a bit longer than usual because I had some other things going on. And then into the mix was the pandemic, which threw a spanner in the works for my research
you couldn't
for a little.
meet with people.
Well, that was part of it.
Travel.
And so then it was Zoom, and you just don't have that same social connection.
Daniel, bless his heart, wanted to be in studio with us. Yeah. And Daniel and Michelle came up, and we're going to go to lunch afterwards. And we're just going to pretend there's no pandemic and everything's fine.
That's right. I've received every shot I can.
It's over, as have I. I do notice, by the way, and I don't know if this is real in publishing or not, that your name has moved from below the name gets bigger as the books are successful, right? Pretty soon it's a Daniel Suarez novel.
If you take a look at my books over time, they move, they expand in font,
now you're
they
above
font,
the title,
but it's smaller. But it's beneath New York Times bestselling author. You know what it is? It's always a fascinating conversation whenever you get into cover. And boy, if you ever want to wind up an author, ask them what they think about their covers.
Well, okay. I don't want to wind you up per se. Tell me about the Delta V. This is a painting. And it is not, by the way, an artificial intelligence painting.
No, it is not.
It's a real painting.
This, again, what I was trying to get at there, and I should say that I'm very thankful, actually, Dutton does include me in the conversation.
Is that
for
James
cover.
Tye down there in his cave?
That is James Tye, but that's Earth. And what we wanted was a concept. James Tye, JT, is a protagonist. He's the beginning protagonist in Delta V.
He's one of your best characters, by the way. I love Tye.
A composite person based on people that I've met and knew.
Oh, interesting.
I actually
Maybe
was
that's why it's so real.
A childhood friend with an extreme caver who knew a gentleman named Bill Stone, and probably people in your audience are familiar with him. He is the CEO of, I believe it's now defunct Shackleton Energy, which was a lunar mining company. But Bill also built his own rebreathers and is an extreme cave diver. He will go 3,000 feet underground to then begin diving in a cave and go deep. It's the most dangerous and extreme diving you can do. And he built his own rebreather. I mean, this guy is hardcore. And JT is not quite like that, but he is definitely an adventurous person. And I found that extreme cave divers are sort of the I want to say the tribe of people you want to go out and do things in space.
Going to pick, that's one of the things that was fun about Delta V is who they picked to go out on this first asteroid mining mission.
That's right. Extreme mountain climbers and former taikonauts and cave divers. And in the case of a cave diver, they need to understand intuitively pressure and how the body metabolizes gases at different pressures. So he innately is well suited to operating in space. And so this cover starts on the surface of the Earth in a cave, but with a view to space.
Now, it's funny because in the chat room, we've posted the German cover of Delta V. I think it's James Tye on a rock. He's out. He's out on Ryugu. It's not Ryugu.
Oh, I do love Roald. I love them. They've been a terrific publisher. We had some discussions about...
That's not Ryugu.
About the igneous rock that someone is inexplicably standing upon in low Earth orbit.
In Earth orbit.
The antithesis of what occurs in the book, which is a way to go, I guess.
Now, this one's interesting because it's the moon.
Yes.
This is Critical Mass's cover.
Now, this actually, Michelle sort of conceived of this, and I immediately thought, perfect. This is, again, we wanted a human element, just the beginning of a human element, which is Clark Station, and then the moon, which is, of course, the critical mass in question. But it is, again, metaphorical because, of course, we want a critical mass of public opinion to realize how important this mass is.
Very good.
And we are so fortunate. Earth is incredibly fortunate that we have the moon so close at hand.
It's sitting there waiting for us.
But it's also protected us for millions and billions of years from stray rocks.
We're learning more and more how much the moon takes
it's incredible.
Takes the hit for us.
And that and Jupiter helping us out. Yeah. So we are extremely fortunate, but this may be our gateway to space. Is near Earth asteroids first, and then you take some of those resources to go to the moon. Now, you could do the moon first, but it's going to take a bigger investment up front.
I think you've got it just right.
Yeah, good.
Go get Ryugu.
Yeah.
We've already been there.
Well, there's also another probe that NASA is putting up, an observatory. And John, I'm sorry if I get this wrong. I think it's NEOWISE. It's going up in 2025.
We'll know.
I'm operating on just my local RAM here. But that is going to be an observatory to try to chart all of the near-Earth objects. And by looking in near infrared, it's going to be able to see them. Now, we think there are 500,000 of these near-Earth objects of various size. We believe there's none larger than a kilometer. And that would be like an extinction level event for at least part of us.
Hit us, yeah.
And a lot of these they cross Earth's orbit, and the ones we're totally blind to right now are the ones that come from the direction of the sun. And you'll see this occasionally when you look at the news.
Because you can't see them.
Oh, we just discovered a rock.
Right. Where did that
just
come from? There it is.
breezed right close to us.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I got it right.
You got it
Good.
right.
There's so many spaceships in my head right now.
It's actually cool that we are doing all of this. It feels like we're in a renaissance of space exploration.
I truly believe that. And we need more and more people, both billionaires and government officials who vote on these things, as well as the general public, to realize we really are on sort of the brink of a golden age if we make the right decisions. So we're at I'd say a fork in the road. One way is a crisis and one way is a golden age. And I don't need to tell you which one I would prefer we choose.
I really like that point. We are literally at that fork in the road.
We are that generation that other generations will point back to and say, oh, they were amazing.
They made the right choice or
those
extinction event.
Yeah.
It's funny because you talked about this in on your interview in This Week in Space. Everybody who reads science fiction assumes that spin gravity is just, well, that's, of course, nobody's done it yet.
It's incredible.
Nobody's done it yet. You just think, well, surely they're doing that on ISS or something. No.
They had a plan to do so. And that's the other thing, is the more researchers I talk to and scientists, it's funny. All of these, when I go through the sort of the library of abandoned projects, all I would say to a sci-fi writer, my God, that's just a cornucopia, because if you look at all the things that were conceived of, even designed, look at the asteroid return mission. They started building prototypes, I think, at JPL, and then it was defunded. And so, I wanted to use that, and I used that in Delta V for the Grasshopper unit. Well, that was based upon a real asteroid retrieval mission. And by the way, I have to make this clear. When I say asteroid mining, I do not mean bringing those resources back here to Earth.
That's so important.
It's so important.
That would be a mistake.
Yeah. You leave it where it's most valuable, at the edge of Earth's gravity well, where you can start to build things out there. And then once you build a space station and an industrial infrastructure out there, you can go just about anywhere in the solar system easily.
Here's the problem. That's a long-term prospect.
Sure.
Because you don't start, getting the returns until you're well down the road of building stuff and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And if I just bring it home, I can sell it.
But then the economics make no sense.
Yeah.
There's certain things. I mean,
if there's gold on them.
Even if there's gold, you really have to, again, closely look at your spreadsheet to say, is that still going to make sense?
Right.
Platinum, because again, there is, I can't remember the name of the asteroid, but it might be Psyche, that contains like a quintillion dollars worth of stuff. And I always like to point out, unless you brought it back here, because if you brought a moon-sized piece of platinum back to Earth,
it loses its value.
It will now be as common as tin.
Yeah.
Or maybe less.
It loses its value.
Yeah, more common than tin.
You've killed the supply and demand.
So it doesn't make any sense. However, if you utilize those out in space, you can build extraordinary things. And that's the other thing.
What is the turnaround time? For let's say I today figured, let's go to Ryugu. It's going to take us, until
every asteroid is going to be different.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Delta V, it takes them 28 days to get there, with less energy than it would take to reach our own moon at December 13th, 2032. We got that exact trajectory. However, a year later, it would take 2.5 years to get back and more. So it's all timing. Try to think of it's like one of these
somebody's got to be
clocks.
Is somebody aiming like, okay, we got 9 years, let's get this going?
Well, that's partly what I'm trying to inspire people to do. So if you happen to have an asteroid mining company, please read Delta V.
9 years. Is it the Japanese who landed a probe on Ryugu?
JAXA. Yeah, and they were very helpful. Again, this would be another example of people I got in touch with. I believe, I'm going to say her name. Hopefully she doesn't mind. Julie Bellarose at NASA helped connect me with the team at JAXA, who was the Hayabusa 2 mission. So I didn't have a visual on Ryugu when I was writing the book. And instead, towards the end of writing it came into view. And so I was writing the book based on the spectral examination of what it was composed of. Fortunately, it turned out to be correct. And the size and mass of it turned out to be correct. And what I was able to add was that equatorial ridge that was in the actual asteroid from it spinning. So, because really these asteroids are very often just rubble piles.
Yeah.
And
they're not even solid.
They're not even solid. They're basically like a lump of gravel in space. So I try to define that in the book, that mining an asteroid is unlike any mining.
You don't land on it and dig with a steam shovel.
You pull up next to it and you have to tease boulders off of it. It's sort of like, just imagine trying to mine a pile of gravel that's in free fall in a vacuum that's being blasted with radiation. And it's alternately burning hot and ice cold, or below ice cold. And that's sort of the challenge you're facing.
Doug M. in our Discord asks, and I hope this is not a painful question. All of your novels are so visual. I was sure by now there'd be a movie of Demon. What's the story, Morning Glory? Why aren't we, I know they've optioned these.
Yes. Almost every book I've done, except for Kill Decision. It was interesting. Every book just about I've done has been optioned, or at least I've been offered things. I haven't always said yes. To me, it is important that, again, I understand things can, wow, we're keeping the Roald cover up there.
Can you scroll past that, Ant? Because it's making Daniel crazy.
Like, why is it next to Earth? Anyway, sorry, I'm okay.
Why is there a hunk of granite with a guy on it?
Right. And it's like an igneous rock. And why is he standing on it? Anyway, sorry, what was the question?
Netflix.
Oh, yes, film production or TV production. I have conversations. I'm approached fairly often about Damon as well. A number of scripts have been developed, probably 5 or 6 or 7 at this point for various properties. But my books, I think, are somewhat of a challenge because they are science-based.
Yeah.
And when I say challenge, it doesn't mean
The Martian. The Martian was science-based.
That to me seems like it's a proof that people want realistic sci-fi, grounded sci-fi, as we call it. And so for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked out. I would only say that Hollywood tends to develop about 20 times the material.
It's so hard to get a movie made.
Versus what they produce.
Yeah.
And especially, we've just had a profusion of television recently. So for example, Delta V, we talked to various parties and you would get a response like, well, we already have a space show. And it's like, hold
Lord.
it. It's space. It's like, you don't need just one show. You can have, but that goes into this idea of what is science fiction and what is just fiction at this point. Right. There has to be a point at which because this is very realistic, where a space story is not, let's say, science fiction. It's just fiction because we're doing it. Yeah. So it's the same thing with cell phones. Like cell phones are in every single show, comedy, drama, whatever it is. It's just the background element, whereas they used to be some sort of unusual thing. I'm hoping at some point that just because something is in space doesn't mean it's primarily, it's a sci-fi space show. It's just how we live. That's where we need to get to. So my answer would be that I often speak with Hollywood production companies and studios about adapting my work. I'm still hopeful that can be done. And I have a number of things in play now. We'll see what happens.
I could just see a Hollywood executive saying, "What the hell is a Lisa juice circle? I don't understand."
That's an excellent imitation.
What are you, Lagrange? I don't get it.
That's right. Just reverse the polarity. It'll be fine. But
do you have anti-gravity? Because we really need that.
Oh yeah, different book.
We figured out a way to make hair stick up, and it's really anyway. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. I don't want it to be made into a movie or a TV show because I'm always disappointed by sci-fi once it's made into something, because my mind and your incredible writing, my mind is building something so much better than any movie set could ever be.
Well, that is the wonderful thing about the written word.
It's alive. James Ty is in my head. Yeah. And if you get Ryan Gosling to play him, it's going to destroy it for me.
It would be different. But again, the appeal there is that if you can reach a broader audience with this, and I don't want to say message, let's say this narrative, because it moves the Overton window. It moves the frame of acceptable conversation of what we assume. Like, if people start assuming we can, of course, make an amazing future, and this would be one way how, that completely changes how we engage.
You got to get it in people's minds that it's possible. Yeah. You got to give them some urgency, because we are at the crossroads.
Exactly. You're exactly correct.
And that there isn't a lot more time to prepare for this.
And there's also tremendous opportunity. So even if you are a selfish bastard, you can jump in and get busy on this, and you can make a huge amount of money and sort of as a side effect, help the world.
I just have to say, though, the one thing, people die in this.
People have misadventures, yes.
Misadventures. And, personally, I think there's no lack of people who would say, yeah, sure, fine, I'll do it.
Look at Mount Everest. People die on Mount Everest almost every year. As a matter of fact, in one episode, I think 7 people died.
Yeah, that's a good
going
point.
to Mount Everest. And so I like to say that there are among us explorers and adventurers, and they have an evolutionary purpose. And they have always been the pathfinders, the trailblazers, the people who chart the oceans. And we see them now jumping off of buildings and skydiving and racing cars.
You want
they
some
need
adventure.
a frontier.
Yeah.
And so that's what Nathan Joyce wanted to do. He wanted to give them a frontier. Yeah. And they will go out and do sort of what they are born to do anyway.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know how we can get the word out better. It's one of the things, and this is really clear in Critical Mass, the latest book, is this can't be an individual effort. It can't be just private industry. It can't be just government. Mm-hmm. It can't be our country alone. This is a global problem that needs a global solution.
Well, this is why I had the cislunar commodity exchange in this book be created, and it's blockchain based. It's because you want some transparency and you want people around the world to have an opportunity to participate in it, no matter what their means.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to engender opposition, because people are not going to want to think, well, they're going and they're going to take control of space for either nationalistic or personal reasons, and then it hardens hearts against this. And this is the exact opposite of what we need. We need more people embracing this. And so there has to be some aspect of it, let's say in the architecture, in the protocol of it, that makes it a bit more equitable. And yet there's so much upside that I don't think that's going to convince people who want to really become hugely wealthy doing this. They will still become enormously wealthy even so. Yeah. But everybody else has to participate in it again so that they understand why this needs to be done.
Start by reading the books. Delta V is a great way to start, but you can read Critical Mass all by itself. Yeah. Just get both of them.
It is a better experience, yes.
It's really well worth getting both of them. In fact, I think both John and I went back and reread Delta V.
Oh, that's great.
To get ready for. Well, you would kindly
sent
me a copy, and well, you did too. You need more RAM. We got to upgrade that RAM.
That's right.
Daniel Suarez is a hero, right? And he's writing not only great fiction, but also working to make the world a better place. And it's not preachy. I don't want to say it's preachy.
No. Try to make it exciting.
What it is inspiring.
Yeah.
It's inspiring that we could do this, that we have the means, we have the technology, we just need the will. And
some people have the will, too. You just need to be able to help them get there to start things rolling.
Elon, just get off that Twitter thing. It's just distracting you. You need to focus. Focus, man. Dutton publishes it. It just came out January 31st. Again, Jeff Gerner reads it on Audible. Yep. He does a great job.
As all my books, yep.
Yep, as he does all of them. If you haven't read Demon, you could just get the whole... Do you have a slipcase version of all of them? That's what I want.
I like the way you're thinking.
Get the Daniel Suarez bookshelf.
Michelle, get Dutton on the phone.
Start with Demon, and that will give you so much momentum. You'll get through the whole damn set in no time at all. And you'll end right here at Critical Mass, probably right at the point where Daniel's next volume comes out.
Maybe.
And you can keep the ball rolling. This is really, really a great book, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Daniel.
Likewise.
I am often, when we do these triangulations, disheartened and despairing of our future, But it's nice to talk to somebody who gives us hope. And not only just hope, something absolutely within our grasp. It's so close.
Yeah.
If we could just do it. Critical Mass is the book. Daniel Suarez is the author. Thank you, Daniel, for making this an extra special day.
Oh, so wonderful to see you again, Leo.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Thanks to everybody in IRC and our Discord for joining us. Thanks to you for joining us at home on another great edition of Triangulation. See you next time.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, a bunch of game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. You already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.